Good day, students! Before anything else, I just want to commend everyone for making it this far. We're now in the second quarter of this course and few more lessons to go, and we're done with the first semester. Just hold on and hang in there. During the first quarter, you wrote different forms of poetry, employing the different literary techniques and devices. Thus, you're now one step closer to be a creative writer. Now, we'll move to another main highlight of this course, which is fiction. For today's lesson, we're going to tackle the elements of fiction, specifically the characters, setting, and plot. Here are the objectives of the lesson. Number 1. Critique the story by identifying the elements of fiction. Number 2. Create a story and illustrate the plot through the use of comic strips. The following are the topics that we're going to zero in or discuss for today. Number 1. What is fiction? Number 2. Types of fiction. Number 3. Genres of fiction. Number 4. Elements of fiction. There are two branches of literature. These are non-fiction and fiction. Non-fiction is the opposite of fiction, and these writings are about facts and real events, meaning to say that these are true stories or accounts. What about fiction? Now, let's define the word fiction. Etymologically, the word fiction has been derived from the Latin word fictus, which means to form. Webster's dictionary defines it as literature in the form of prose, especially novels that describes imaginary events and people. In other words, these stories are not true or not real because they are just created by the author's imagination. Moreover, fiction may be based on stories of actual historical events. Although imaginary characters are presented in a fictitious setting in stories and novels, they may have some resemblance or similarity to real events and characters. Here are some examples of fiction in literature. Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll is a good example of fiction. The story narrates various adventures of the main character in a fictitious land full of incredible creatures and events. Alice has to go through certain magical experiences in the Wonderland. This entire magical tale is fabricated and imaginary, which makes it a good fiction to enjoy. Another example to portray fiction is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. It is one of the most famous English novels. Unlike the previous example, this story is set in a real-life-like setting. All characters are humans, and no magical or strange events take place in this novel. All of the characters and events in the story are products of Jane Austen's imagination. The novel presents a good fiction of actual life during the 19th century. Always remember that fiction is not a true story. Let's proceed to the types of fiction. There are many types of fiction, but today we're going to define 8 types of fiction. Number 1. Short story. A short story is a work of prose fiction that can be read in one sitting, usually between 20 minutes to an hour. The setting is simplified in one time and place, and 1 or 2 main characters may be introduced. It focuses on a single plot. The average short story has 5,000 to 10,000 words, but they can be anything above 1,000 words. Flash fiction is a short story that is 500 words or less. Example of a short story is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Number 2. Novel. A fictitious narrative with a complex plot, and it is divided into chapters. This is a narrative prose book length. The minimum number of words in a novel is 50,000. There is also what we call novella that has 10,000 to 40,000 words, and the novelette that has a word count between 7,500 and 17,000 words. Example of a novel is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Number 3. Fable. It is a short fictional story that has a moral or teaches a lesson. Fables use humanized animals, objects, or parts of nature as main characters, and are therefore considered to be a subgenre of fantasy. Fable features animals that behave and speak as human beings in order to highlight human follies and weaknesses. Example, Aesop's Fables. It is a well-known collection of fables, and one fable in this collection is The Wolf and the Lamb. Number 4. Fairy tale. A fairy tale is a story, often intended for children, that features fanciful and wondrous characters such as elves, goblins, wizards, but not necessarily fairies. We all love fairy tales. They aren't just for kids. In fact, many are complex morality tales. Example, Cinderella by Brothers Grimm. Number 5. Frame tale. It is also called as frame story, wherein it is a story set within a story, narrative, or movie, told by the main or the supporting character. A character starts telling a story to other characters, or he sits down to write a story, telling the details to the audience or readers. It is an overall unifying story within which one or more tales are related. Example, The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Number 6. Legend. Legends are stories about human actions or events that have not been proven nor documented in real history. An unverified story handed down from earlier times, especially one popularly believed to be historical. Example, The Flying Dutchman. Number 7. Myth. A myth is a classic story that usually focuses on a particular hero or event and explains the mysteries of nature, existence, or the universe with no true basis in fact. Myths exist in every culture, but the most well-known in Western culture and literature are part of Greek and Roman mythology. Myth usually features ruling gods, goddesses, and heroes having godlike qualities. Example, The Greek Myths by Robert Graves. Number 8. Parable. It is a short story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. There are many examples of parables in religious texts such as the Bible and the Quran. Example, the parable of prodigal son in the Bible. The third part of this lecture is the genres of fiction. Literary fiction. Literary novels are considered works with artistic value and literary merit. They often include political criticism, social commentary, and reflections on humanity. An example of literary fiction is the book of Virginia Woolf entitled To the Lighthouse. Mystery. Also called detective fiction. It follows a detective solving a case from start to finish. They drop clues and slowly reveal information, turning the reader into a detective trying to solve the case too. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories are examples of this genre. Thriller. It is a dark, mysterious, and suspenseful plot-driven story. They very seldom include comedic elements, but what they lack in humor, they make up for in suspense. Thrillers keep readers on their toes and use plot twists, red herrings, and cliffhangers to keep them guessing until the end. In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware is an example of a thriller. Horror. Horror novels are meant to scare, startle, shock, and even repulse readers, generally focusing on themes of death, demons, evil spirits, and the afterlife. They prey on fears with scary beings like ghosts, vampires, werewolves, witches, and monsters. In horror fiction, plot and characters are tools used to elicit a terrifying sense of dread. Example of this is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Historical. Historical fiction novels take place in the past, written with a careful balance of research and creativity. They transport readers to another time and place, which can be real, imagined, or a combination of both. Many historical novels tell stories that involve actual historical figures or historical events with historical settings. Example is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Romance. Romantic fiction are love stories between two people. They're light-hearted, optimistic, and have an emotionally satisfying ending. Romance novels do contain conflicts, but it doesn't overshadow the romantic relationship, which always prevails in the end. The Fault in Our Stars by John Green is an example of romantic fiction. Western. Western novels tell the stories of cowboys, settlers, and outlaws exploring the western frontier and taming the American Old West. They're shaped specifically by their genre-specific elements and rely on them in ways that novels and other fiction genres don't. Westerns aren't as popular as they once were. The golden age of the genre coincided with the popularity of Western films in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Example is The Brave Cowboy by Edward Abbey. Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman is a literary genre of stories about a character growing psychologically and morally from their youth into adulthood. Generally, they experience a profound emotional loss, set out on a journey, encounter conflicts, and grow into a mature person by the end of the story. Literally translated, a Bildungsroman is a novel of education or novel of formation. Example is the novel The Giver by Louis Lowry. Speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is a supergenre that encompasses a number of different types of fiction, from science fiction to fantasy to dystopian. The stories take place in a world different from our own. Speculative fiction knows no boundaries. There are no limits to what exists beyond the real world. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings are also considered speculative fiction. Science fiction. Sci-fi novels are speculative stories with imagined elements that don't exist in the real world. Some are inspired by hard natural sciences like physics, chemistry, and astronomy. Others are inspired by soft social sciences like psychology, anthropology, and sociology. Common elements of sci-fi novels include time travel, space exploration, and futuristic societies. Example, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Fantasy. Fantasy novels are speculative fiction stories with imaginary characters set in imaginary universes. They are inspired by mythology and folklore and often include elements of magic. The genre attracts both children and adults. Example is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Dystopian. Dystopian novels are a genre of science fiction. They are set in societies viewed as worse than the one in which we live. Dystopian fiction exists in contrast to utopian fiction, which is set in societies viewed as better than the one in which we live. 1984 by George Orwell is an example of dystopian novel. Magical realism. Magical realism novels depict the world truthfully, plus add magical elements. The fantastical elements aren't viewed as odd or unique. They are considered normal in the world in which the story takes place. The genre was born out of the realist art movement and is closely associated with Latin American authors. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez is an example of magical realism. Realist literature. Realist fiction novels are set in a time and place that could actually happen in the real world. They depict real people, places, and stories in order to be as truthful as possible. Realist works of fiction remain true to everyday life and abide by the laws of nature as we currently understand them. Example is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Samuel Clemens or commonly known as Mark Twain. The main focus of this lesson is the elements of fiction. Let's define them one by one. The first element of fiction is character. First off is character. A character is a person, animal, creature, or thing in a story. Writers use characters to perform the actions and speak dialogue, moving the story along a plot line. In other words, characters do the action in the story. Characterization is a means by which writers present and reveal characters. It can be a direct description by showing the character in action or by the presentation of other characters that help to define each other. There are two types of characters. Number one, major characters. They are the most important characters in the story. There are two types, the protagonist and antagonist. Protagonist is the main character around which the whole story revolves. A protagonist is sometimes a hero to the audience or readers. Example is Harry Potter. While antagonist is the character that causes conflict to the protagonist. However, the antagonist could be the protagonist who is torn by a problem within. The antagonist could possibly be a society, team, community, institution, nature, or an item. Antagonist is referred to as a villain or the bad guy against whom a hero or the good guy fights in order to save himself or others. Example of antagonist is Voldemort. Number 2, minor characters. They are not as important as the major characters but still play a large part in the story or written narrative. Their actions help drive the story forward. They may affect the decisions the protagonist or antagonist makes, either helping or interfering with the conflict. Characters can have different traits. Major characters will usually be more dynamic, changing and growing through the story, while minor characters are more static. Example of a minor character is Professor Flitwick. Here are the different character traits. First is static. These are characters that don't change throughout the story. These characters stay the same and they don't develop or grow. Their personality remains the same at the end of the story as it appeared in the beginning. Example, Bellatrix Lestrange in Harry Potter. Second, dynamic. Dynamic characters change throughout the story. They may learn a lesson, become bad, or change in complex ways. A dynamic character faces trials and takes time to learn from his experiences and his mistakes, as well as from the other characters. Example, Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter. Third, flat characters. A flat character has one or two main traits, usually only all positive or negative. The reader does not know much about these characters because the writer does not provide detailed information about them. Example is Mr. Filch in Harry Potter. Fourth, round. These characters have many different traits, good and bad, making them interesting. Like real people, they have deep or profound feelings and passions. A round character has many layers of personality. Major characters must be round characters for them to be believable. Examples are Harry Potter, Ronald Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Severus Snape. Fifth, stock. These are stereotypical characters such as the boy genius, ambitious career person, faithful sidekick, mad scientist, etc. Stereotypical means relating to a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of a person or thing. They are instantly recognizable to readers because it pops up everywhere. Other examples are evil stepmothers, tortured artists, and reluctant heroes. And the last one is foil. A foil is a character that has opposite character traits from another. meant to help highlight or bring out another's positive or negative side. Many times, the antagonist is the foil for the protagonist. Example, Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter. Examples of characters in literature. The Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. In the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Frodo and his friend Sam discover their unexpected personal commitment, emotional and physical strength, and dedication to the cause. Gandalf discovers that his trust was broken by his fellow wizards. Thus, he transforms into a magician with a stronger character. Aragorn, an heir to the line of kings, gives up his title. However, over the period of time, he discovers his leadership skills and decides to regain his crown. All of these characters provide us with good examples of round characters, each having depth of personality and abilities to surprise the readers. Other examples are Katniss Everdeen, Percy Jackson, and Hazel Grace Lancaster. The second element of fiction is setting. Setting. It is the time and place of the story. Setting is where and when a story or scene takes place. It is usually introduced during the exposition or beginning of the story along with the characters. It may also include the environment of the story, which can be made up of the physical location, climate, weather, or social and cultural surroundings. You can set your stories in real time, now or history, and in real geographic locations. Or you can have completely imagined settings like the future or prehistoric, and imagine worlds like another planet or the world of wizards and goblins. Or you can even combine all of these. There are two types of setting: backdrop setting and integral setting. Backdrop setting, the story is timeless and can happen at any point in history or anywhere. The focus is on the lesson or message being delivered. Many fairy tales and children's stories have backdrop settings. It emerges when it is not important for a story and it could happen in any setting. Integral setting, the time and place are important to the story. For example, a story dealing with a historical setting will have a direct impact on the plot. The place and time influence the theme, character, and action of the story. The setting is fully described in both time and place, usually found in historical fiction. Examples of setting in literature. In Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights, its setting plays a vital role as it reflects the mood of major characters and their actions while contributing to its overall atmosphere. The novel has three main settings. The moors symbolize wilderness and freedom, as nobody owns them, and everyone can freely move about anytime. Wuthering Heights depicts the weather around this house, which is stormy and gloomy. The characters are cruel and extremely passionate. Thrushcross Grange, on the other hand, is contrary to Wuthering Heights because its weather is calm, while its inhabitants are dull and weak. Other examples are Hogwarts, Narnia, Camp Half-Blood, Wonderland, and Middle-earth. The third element is plot. Plot is the sequence or series of events that make up a story, whether it's told, written, filmed, or sang. It is how the story develops, unfolds, and moves in time. Plot is known as the foundation of a novel or story around which the characters and settings are built. It is meant to organize information and events in a logical manner. Plots are also known as storylines. There are 5 plot elements or parts of a plot. Exposition. It is found at the beginning of a story wherein characters, setting, and the main conflicts are typically introduced. Exposition is introduction of the story. Rising action. The main character is in crisis, and events leading up to facing the conflict begin to unfold. The story becomes complicated. It is during this part of the story that excitement, tension, or crisis is encountered. Climax. It is the peak of the story. A major event occurs in which the main character faces a major enemy, fear, challenge, or other sources of conflict. The most action, drama, change, and excitement occurs here. In the climax or the main point of the plot, there is a turning point of the story. This is meant to be the moment of highest interest and emotion, leaving the reader to wonder what is going to happen next. Falling action. The story begins to slow down and work towards its end, tying up loose ends. Falling action occurs when events and complications begin to resolve. Resolution or denouement. It is a concluding paragraph that resolves any remaining issues and ends the story. Resolution or the conclusion is the end of a story, which may occur with either a happy or a tragic ending. There are also different structures of a plot. It can be a linear plot structure or a non-linear plot structure. If it is a linear plot structure, the story unfolds in a chronological order. A linear plot consists of a series of events that have a clear beginning, middle, and end. If it is a non-linear plot structure, the story unfolds in a non-chronological order. Events may be interrupted to describe past situations, or a story may start at the middle or end instead of the beginning. Non-linear plots will use different techniques to jump around with characters, events, and timelines. Non-linear plot elements or techniques. Number 1. Foreshadowing. A writer gives an advance hint of what is to come later in the story. This can be done through dialogue, a character's actions, the setting, or another event. It helps readers develop expectations about the story. Number 2. Flashback. It is an interruption of chronological sequence in a literary work by the interjection of events of earlier occurrence. It is used to tell events that occurred in the past to provide a backstory on the character or situation. Number 3. In medias res. Into the middle of things. It opens in the midst of the plot. In medias res begins a narrative in the very middle of its action. The author freely moves backward and forward at his leisure, connecting the dots of the story. Here is the plot of the story The Last Leaf by O. Henry. Exposition. The writer informs the readers that Sue and John C. were two artists who shared a studio in an art colony in Greenwich Village, and that the community was under attack by pneumonia, which during a very cold winter killed a large number of residents in the area. John C. was struck by the disease and became extremely ill. Rising action. The complication in the story is found in John C.'s refusal to fight the disease, literally giving up and accepting the fact that she is going to die. The conflict arises from Sue's attempts to encourage her to fight back. To add to this, John C. has decided that she will die soon as the last leaf has fallen from a vine that she can see through her window. Climax. The climax in the story occurs when there is only one leaf left on the vine. The climactic expectation is that once this leaf has fallen, John C. will die. John C. survives, however, because when she looks out of her window, she notices the leaf is still hanging to the vine, and that inspires her to live. Falling action. The falling action is a description of John C.'s recovery after this dramatic discovery that saves her life. and resolution, John C. is fully recovered and learns of Mr. Berman's unselfish sacrifice. He had finally painted his masterpiece and saved her life, but tragically lost his own life in the process. The function of fiction is to entertain, educate, and inspire the readers and the audience. This form of literature is capable enough to sweep our emotions. Therefore, fiction gives the audience an experience beyond their daily lives. It is also used to point out the flaws and drawbacks of a society, race, and nation, then suggests a solution to the problems. It provides them an insight into the life of the characters, their manners, vicissitudes, and events related to them. Reading fiction has lots of benefits. Studies have shown that imagining stories helps activate the regions of your brain responsible for better understanding others and seeing the world from a new perspective. Also, reading is most effective for stress. Regular readers sleep better, have lower stress levels, higher self-esteem, and lower rates of depression than non-readers. Moreover, reading stories open your mind, widens your vocabulary, and enhances your creativity. Therefore, develop a habit of reading literary fiction now because of the countless benefits it offers. This concludes our lesson for today. To sum up, fiction is not a real story since it is just made from the author's imagination. Moreover, fiction has types, genres, and elements. Characters, setting, and plot are some of the elements of fiction. Characters are the people, animals, or things that do the action in the story. Setting is the time and place of the story, and plot is the series of events of a written narrative. We'll discuss the other elements next week. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and God bless.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarians.